Tonight, we journey into the extraordinary as we delve deep into classified military operations, clandestine space missions, and unprecedented encounters with enigmatic beings from the distant cosmos. Our compass for this expedition is a man named JP, an ordinary individual who lived an extraordinary life. His story begins with a startling encounter with a group of human-like extraterrestrials known to many of us as Nordics. Yet, this is just the start. JP's world takes a fascinating twist as he's drawn into a classified branch of the U.S. military. This grants him unparalleled access to a world that seems to defy our concept of reality. His experiences, far beyond what we consider worldly, involve covert missions to underground cities and cosmic arcs, all the while maintaining contact with the Nordic extraterrestrials. His personal narratives, teeming with advanced technology, anti-gravity spacecraft, and glimpses of exotic, undisclosed locations, reflect an incredible journey that invites us to expand our understanding of our world, and indeed of the cosmos itself. The man bringing JP's extraordinary journey to light is none other than Dr. Michael Salla, a recognized scholar in international politics, conflict resolution, and a pioneer in exopolitics, the study of political processes associated with extraterrestrial life. Dr. Salla bridges the gap between humanity and the cosmos, standing at the frontier of a new era of understanding. Are you intrigued? Then brace yourself as we dive into a world where the lines between reality and fiction blur, where the secrets of the universe unfold, and where our understanding of knowledge is put to the test. The universe is about to get a whole lot more interesting.
Welcome to Veritas. If this is your first time listening, welcome home. To access tonight's full interview and all of our exclusive material, simply join the Veritas Plus family by clicking on the subscribe button at veritasradio.com. And while you're there, don't forget to check out the Veritas store for a range of great products, including focused life force energy. Experience the power of FLFE with a 15-day free trial today. No credit card required. We're excited to announce the launch of our brand new Veritas Plus Insider, your source for exclusive news and insights you won't find anywhere else. If you're looking to get in touch with Mel, have a guest suggestion, or would like to provide feedback, simply click on the contact button on our website. So sit back, relax, and enjoy tonight's show. And now, here's your host, Mel Hostelrick.
The title of his new book is U.S. Army Insider Missions, Space Arks, Underground Cities, and ET Contact, marking the 8th thrilling installment of the Secret Space Program series. You can learn more about Dr. Michael Salla's work at exopolitics.org. And now, broadcasting directly from Nashville, Tennessee, it's my privilege to welcome Dr. Michael Salla. Hello, Michael, and welcome back to Veritas.
Thank you, Mel. Great to be back.
It's my pleasure. And Michael, I just told you offline, I just finished the book. I could not put it down. This is an incredible story. So I want everybody to remain open-minded, because what you are about to share today can really shatter our paradigm. So I want to, as you know, I like to go in chronological order. Let's start at the very beginning. In 2008, you received a phone call from a young man you've called JP. Can you share what that initial conversation was like?
Sure. Well, he contacted me. He had just returned from Brazil, and he spoke about a contact experience he had with some human-looking extraterrestrials he called Nordics. And he just didn't give me a lot of details, a lot of particulars. He just described it as a kind of otherworldly experience. He had a very hazy recollection, but he remembered seeing these 3 human-looking extraterrestrials in front of a spacecraft, and that started a process where he then began to have dreams and visions of these extraterrestrials showing him technologies, advanced technologies. And so, over the subsequent years, he began to tell me about the different technologies that he had developed with the help of these extraterrestrials, through these visions and through these dreams that he was having. And he said that these technologies he was building were of interest to some shadowy, covert groups that began developing an interest in him after he contacted some mainstream scientists. He said he began by approaching a neuroscientist at one of the universities in Florida, near Tampa. And he said that this was a well-known neuroscientist, and he said some things about how this technology that JP thought that the technology he was developing would be something that would enhance psychic abilities. And so, this neuroscientist, had an interest in what JP was doing, and eventually some covert operatives began to monitor JP and began to encourage him to work with them. And so over the next few years, there was this kind of process where JP kept an ordinary job as a kind of landscaper and a musician. He's a musician by vocation, but like a lot of musicians, they struggle. So he supplemented his income with a job as a landscaper, and he would come up with these inventions and he would share them with these covert operatives. And when he did that, they would mysteriously disappear. And I was telling him, look, if you start working with these organizations, military, corporate groups, I mean, they're going to steal the technology. They're never going to let you put it out into the public arena. But he worked with them. He continued to try to build these things with the help of some insiders, and so it went on like that for a few years. And over the years, he began to talk more and more about being followed, about the visions, about the dreams, about these kind of like interactions he was having with the Nordics. And so I was open-minded, but I never went public. And the reason I didn't go public was that he didn't give me the details I kind of look for in terms of going public on a witness. You need specific details that you can verify, that you can check. And he never gave me that in the first 9 years of our communications. It was always, he'd tell me what was happening and being followed and inventing things, and covert operatives wanting him to work with them. They wanted him to join the military. So, he was being asked to join the military. And I understand as a contactee why the military would be interested in you. Then around 2015, things began to take a more kind of specific focus, where he was being taken to these various locations. Some of them were off planets, some of them could have been in underground civilizations, where he was being exposed to different technologies, different artifacts, meeting different beings, meeting with the Nordics, meeting with covert operatives from the military. So, he's telling me this, that these experiences began in 2015. So I just kept the record. I taped him sometimes. Other times I just took notes of what he said he experienced. And I thought, well, this is all interesting. I don't know if I'll go public. I don't feel confident going public on your story yet. So I just kept the record of it. And what tipped the scales, Mel, was in 2017, he shared some photos. He began sharing photos with me, and that's when I went public.
But not only was it the photos, and I'll continue in chronological order, but he was a civilian. How old was he in 2007 when you first started interacting with him?
In 2008, he was in his early 20s.
2008, that's right, early 20s. So by now, if anybody wants to go to the military, they probably would have gone since the age of 18. But he joined the military after all these events started happening, correct?
That's right. Yeah, he joined kind of like well into his 30s. And, that in itself was very unusual. He was saying people were asking him, what agency do you work for? Because, the military, the people there, when they look at someone joining the military in their 30s, they always suspect, this is a cover, that this is some kind of sheep dipping operation where this person is working for another organization. And so, he was asked by his NCOs, who you're working with, what agency you're with. So they were suspicious of him. And the irony is that, they were correct, but not in the way they think.
Why the Army and not, say, the Air Force or the Navy? As you know, the Navy for the longest time was the one in charge of all of this.
Well, that's the interesting thing. He began sharing with me these experiences that he had with Air Force operatives. So it was always Air Force. It was never Navy. It was always Air Force with JP. And probably, I don't know, I guess because it was he was living near MacDill Air Force Base, which is a huge base, home of Special Operations Command. So it's an Air Force facility, and so he was living right next to it. And so the operatives from that base were the ones that were visiting him, monitoring him, checking out what he was experiencing. Because clearly, I mean, if you think about it, from the perspective of the military, if you have a civilian having contact with human-looking extraterrestrials, well, you're going to monitor that person, and you're going to try to get that person to, if you conclude that they're being genuine and that they have experiences with advanced technologies. I mean, in the book, in that early period, 2015, 2016. JP is saying that he's been taken to these facilities where he's testing extraterrestrial weapons. So, you can imagine from the perspective of the Air Force monitoring all of this. JP's telling me, and I knew, we both knew as he was telling me over the phone that the phone was being tapped, everything was being recorded, and he's telling me about how these extraterrestrials were taking him on these missions and giving him these technologies. He described one incident involving this a feline-looking extraterrestrial, a very ancient-looking feline, like a cat person, if you like. And this person was like a weapons instructor. And it took him and several others, at least one other, to this site where they were testing weapons, a kind of handheld weapon that would just be triggered by squeezing the hand. It was like it was a ring. He described it as a ring. So all you would do is like squeeze your hand and it would shoot a pulse of energy, very powerful pulse of energy. So he was being trained in this. Well, you can imagine from the perspective of the Air Force why they would want someone like that to join the Air Force. And so they were asking him, you should join. And JP was telling me, well, they want me to join. What do you think I should do? I said, look, don't do it. If you do it, I mean, they'll control you. I mean, you won't be able to tell me what's going on anymore because they can just shut you up very easily. So he didn't join. He followed my advice and didn't join. And so that, that's the way it went for a few more years. And it was only in 2019, so 4 years later, after these kinds of incidents, that's when he joined. And, there were a few things that really convinced him to join. One was the creation of Space Force and Space Command. They were created in September 2019 for Space Command, and Space Force was created in December of 2019. So JP was told by his Air Force contacts, they said, look, Space Force has just been created. They're still setting up. Why don't you join the military? And in sometime in the future, you'll go into Space Force because you have all the skills, you have the experience, and you'll join Space Force or Space Command, right? So that was what he was told. And he was told, just join. It doesn't matter what branch of the military. So JP joined the military in 2019, thinking that would be his point of entry into Space Force. And he was told, join the army. Now, why the army? Why not the Air Force? That was the question I had, and the way it was described was that, to me, was that it didn't matter what service. That, in fact, because the Air Force personnel were being recruited into Space Force, that it wouldn't matter that he was in the Army, because they would be recruiting people from all the branches, the Army, the Navy, the Marines, into the Space Force once it was set up. So that's what he was told. So, they steered him in, and, I don't know if they tricked him. I don't know if he was misled, but I think he joined expecting he would end up in the Air Force, but he ended up in the Army. And, I must say, in the years since, he's very happy with the Army. I mean, he loves being part of the Army. He loves the culture. So, but it's turned out that it's turned out that he does indeed work for Space Command. When he's taken on these missions, he is taken on TDY, which is temporary duty, out of his normal military assignment. So his normal military occupation specialty is as ordnance and a chemical equipment repairer. So kind of pretty mundane job assignment. That's what he's trained in. But he was also trained in Special Forces, and that's not usual. Huh. He was trained in Special Forces, and that was because to be part of these Space Command missions, he needed to be skilled enough to be able to handle the kind of circumstances and conditions that are involved with off-world or missions into the inner Earth and so forth.
I just wonder what's going to appear on his DD-214 when he is honorably discharged in the future, what the real caption will show up on that little card. But let me go back again to when he went to Brazil. He got married to his Brazilian wife, and then he went to meet her parents in Brazil, to Goiânia. By the way, I have friends in Goiânia, and they tell me of all sorts of strange things that they see all the time in that part of Brazil. So what exactly happened in Brazil?
Well, he went and spent time to meet with the family of his wife, and they went to a hotel nearby they went to a farm that was nearby. So they went to a farm, and for JP, this was the first time that he had been to a Brazilian farm. And so he was very excited by that. He talked about eating a lot of food, and they just had a really kind of festive day. And so at night, he woke up at night. He wasn't able to sleep. I'm not sure what time it was, kind of like 1 a.m. or something like that. And he says he felt this compulsion to go outside. So he went outside and he saw this light. And so he went towards this light there in this farm in that province of Goiânia in Brazil. And that's when he saw a craft. And he then had that experience. And he was, as I said, he was kind of pretty vague about the details. He didn't remember anything about the names, about where they're from, any of the specifics. He just said that, there were these 3 human-looking Nordics that were there in front of the craft, and he remembers seeing them. He remembers the lights, and then the next thing he remembers is like being inside and being dirty, and he said that he didn't tell anyone because he felt scared that they would think that he was crazy, because I guess he wanted to make a good impression, and so he didn't tell anyone. And when he went back to the US, back to his home in Florida, I actually at the time, I'm not quite sure if it was it could have been he was probably living in Tampa, Florida. When he went back to Florida, that's when he contacted me and told me about that incident in Goiânia, Brazil.
So let's fast forward. Then he comes back to Tampa, and time progresses. He contacts you with these stories. Obviously, you didn't believe him, and I don't blame you, because their extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, and you didn't receive that until over a decade later, right?
Yeah, basically, it was only in 2017 when he started sending me photographs, really good, clear photographs of flying triangle-shaped craft and flying rectangle-shaped craft and even flying saucer-shaped craft in that vicinity of MacDill Air Force Base. And that and what that was very compelling, because now it wasn't just a matter of I saw this craft, or I was taken on this craft. It was like, here I have photos. And what was really amazing in September of 2017, when he was sending me all these photos, was that he was being approached by covert operatives from MacDill, and that they prompted him, look up, look over there, look up, or he would get a phone call, look up
at a certain time.
Yeah, at the exact time when a craft was flying up there. So he would look up and there's a craft, and so he'd take photographs or video, and that's when he began sending them to me. So not only was he taking photographs of these flying triangle and flying rectangles that he believed were part of this kind of covert operation out of MacDill, he said that these were also craft that some of them he had been taken on, and some that he had seen back in 2015, 16, and so forth, when he was having these other experiences. So he had photographic evidence supporting his claims. So that to me was when I decided, okay, this is, he's got amazing stories to share. I certainly would love to have more details, but the stories are intriguing. But now with these photos, now I have some solid evidence that he's the real deal, and that these things are really happening to him.
And it seems that this is the part that's really hard to understand, because what we are about to hear, folks, it seems so outlandish to some people. And if this is truly happening, and our military, not only the United States, but Russia, China, and perhaps other countries are involved, this is something that you would think has the highest classification possible. But there's some people within the government that want him to disclose or to share this information with you and therefore the public.
That's right. And the interesting thing, Mel, is that there's that group, and I think the way JP described the events and the people and the interactions, I mean, the group was clearly part of this covert Air Force unit, and we eventually identified it because he was taken on one of the craft. This was a rectangle-shaped craft. He was taken on there, and a soldier approached him, and the soldier wore a patch, and the patch was of Air Force Special Operations. And that's very significant because, when he told me about it, he just described the patch. He did a drawing, and we didn't know who does this patch belong to. And so we looked online and we checked around, and then we eventually found out that was the patch of Air Force Special Operations. And Air Force Special Operations, I mean, they call themselves Air Commando. So it's kind of like the Delta Force of the Air Force, or like the SEALs of the Air Force Special Operations. And that these guys were on this rectangle craft that JP had been taken on. And what's really interesting is that because they were wearing a patch, that what that tells us is that craft was not an experimental craft. If it was an experimental craft, you wouldn't have had any patches. You would have just had people wearing kind of like black uniforms or scientific overalls or something, because if you're testing a craft, it's under kind of this testing mode, and they're just wanting to check out if everything works okay. So you have scientists, or you have people there that are just checking everything out. But when these craft are operational, that they're being used for covert missions all over the planet or off planet, that's when you can have actual units assigned to these craft. So, that seeing that patch was very significant because it showed that this was an operation. That rectangle was part of an operational unit out of Special Operations Command at MacDill, which is the central hub for special operations of the US military all over the world. So, and JP was seeing that craft. He had been on that craft, and he was being encouraged by operatives within the Air Force to take photographs of that craft and to share it with me and for me to put it out, which is what I did back in 2017.
Is it safe to say that if somebody's telling him when to look up and photograph, that they must have control over those craft? And if that's the case, for example, the TR-3B, the triangular craft that many people have seen, and some other craft that could be considered extraterrestrial when in fact they could be exotic technology that we've had for quite some time. Do you think that what he photographed was ours, at least most of the photographs that you received?
Totally, yeah. He had a number of experiences before 2017 when he was taken on flying triangles, and he said it described the pilot, typically as an Air Force pilot, and that was up until 2017. His experiences were primarily with either flying triangles or TR-3B type craft that were being operated by the Air Force, or these flying saucer shaped craft that were extraterrestrial in origin, and they belonged to the Nordics. So those were the two types of craft up until September 2017 that he had described. But then in 2017, something really dramatic happened. So in early September 2017, he's giving me these photos. COVID operatives are encouraging him to take the photos. I'm putting that information out into the public arena. So for the first time, the public's learning about JP and what he's seeing up there. And you can't deny the photos because, he would give me 6 or 9 photos of these flying triangles flying over successive days near MacDill Air Force Base. So, there you have evidence that can be easily confirmed if you start interviewing witnesses. There must have been others, and JP was saying, yeah, other people saw it. So it wouldn't have been a hard thing to confirm if any kind of newspaper explored it. But unfortunately, no newspaper, no major organization explored his claims. At the time, I was living in Hawaii, so I was a long way away. He's telling me all this, and no one's investigating it. And I think MUFON did investigate one flying triangle sighting in the area, but that was it. But nevertheless, I think what happened was that while there was the Air Force covert operatives that were wanting this information to get out, there was another faction that didn't want this information to get out. And JP learned through various warnings and threats, intimidation, harassment, that this faction was associated with the Men in Black and the CIA, that there was this kind of Men in Black CIA faction that would harass him, that would say, don't take video, that it was okay for him to take photos, but no video. And he would get phone calls, and he'd take some video and he'd get a phone call saying, delete the video. He's taking a video of a flying triangle in the area, and he gets a phone call saying delete the video or else. And so that was what was going on. And and on his job, he was threatened. On one of his regular job as a landscaper, he went to one house. I describe it in the book. One incident where he goes to do a landscaping job at a house, and he's met by the owner or renter, and so they start talking. And this person at that house, let's assume he was renting it. He says, "You see that house over there? That belongs to the chief CIA operative for MacDill Air Force Base." And JP said, "Oh, okay." And the guy then turned to him and looked at him straight in the eyes and said, "We're watching everything you do."
Wow.
And that was it. End of conversation. Then he walked away. So what JP was caught in the middle of was this tug of war, which continues to this very day between one faction in the military intelligence community that wants disclosure, that really badly wants disclosure, because the Air Force has, and the Navy, they have so much to gain by disclosure. But you have another faction involving the CIA that has everything to lose by disclosure. So you can see why the CIA is working with these nebulous men in black to kind of like stifle disclosure, because they have everything to lose. But the Air Force, the Navy, and Space Force today have everything to gain through disclosure, because what it means is that once you have disclosure, then funding for these off-world vehicles moves from this kind of shadowy intelligence world where the CIA dominates into this kind of open source military world where the Pentagon dominates. And that's the fight. That's the battle over the disclosure.
That's so interesting what you're saying, because I'm thinking of 1963. I think that was the moment, the coup detat that happened after Kennedy was killed, and the Warren Commission basically taking over the investigation. I think the CIA took over this nation, and thankfully we still have some good people within it, and it's fragmented, and hopefully we'll win, but they're trying their best to keep this information quiet, keep it from Congress. And we'll, at the end of the show, I want to discuss the latest news of this military individual, as you know, who's a whistleblower now, and the law is with him because of the National Defense Authorization Act, the recent one that allows that, but we'll discuss that later. But what I'm thinking, if JP was a civilian, if I were a civilian and all of these things are happening to me, and I want to share it with the world, I would think, what would be the best way to do this? People are not going to believe me if I'm simply a civilian, but perhaps they might if I become part of the military. Was that the motivation for him to join the military?
That was definitely one of the factors that drove him to join the military. Yeah, that he felt that he would be more effective. And there was an actual incident, like in 2016, I describe in the book, where he was taken by these Air Force operatives. He and another person were taken to this floating donut-shaped ship somewhere in the Bermuda Triangle. And he was taken there, and there were a whole bunch of extraterrestrials arriving on this Navy facility. And an Army general came out of this facility and welcomed the extraterrestrials, looked at JP and his companion and said, and then yelled at them and said, "What are you doing here?" And he kind of swore at them and told them to basically get lost. And so what that signified was that even though you had people within the Air Force that wanted to expose JP to these different technologies, the way the compartmentalized world of covert operations concerning extraterrestrial life is concerned is that, when you come across the security or the program managers of a particular program, it doesn't matter who recommends you. What really matters is what that person on the ground says. And when that person looked at JP and said he recognized he was a civilian, he told him to get lost. We're not going to let you onto this facility.
But he was not a civilian at the time, was he?
This was in 2016. So at that time, in 2016, JP was a civilian.
Oh, he had not joined the military yet.
Correct.
Yet he was there. How was he able to get there?
By one of these flying triangles, by some variation of a TR-3 craft. So it was a covert Air Force operatives took him to this facility because they wanted him to check out an ancient technology below this floating platform at the bottom of the Bermuda Triangle. They wanted him to check it out. The Ark, exactly. And so that was what the Air Force operatives wanted to happen. But the Army officer in charge said no.
But why? Were they trying to convince him to join the military by showing him that?
I'm not sure what their motivation was. I think they what was clear was that they were taking JP to many different strange environments. It wasn't as though they said, "Oh, this is a guy who is skilled or knowledgeable about extraterrestrial technologies, and we want to get him to help us understand and develop, some specific types of extraterrestrial technologies, whether it's propulsion, free energy, or weapons." It was like they were exposing him to a wide variety of experiences. I think they were evaluating him to find out what he could access and what he couldn't access, because that's the big secret. Because obviously people are always caught up in, well, where's the evidence? Where's the truth? The people that are running these programs, they're dealing with ancient technologies that go back thousands, tens of thousands of years, hundreds of thousands of years even, belonging to civilizations that we don't even have a memory of. We have inner Earth civilizations. We have extraterrestrials visiting us. We have these ancient space arks all over the planet and on other moons. So the people running these covert operations, they wanted to expose JP to a wide variety of these different technologies to kind of find out, what he's knowledgeable about or where he could help them. So I think that was the reason they took him in 2016 to this floating platform out there in the Bermuda Triangle, thinking that he could go down into this space ark that had just been discovered. But because JP was a civilian at the time, that was a problem, and he was refused entry. And so, I think that must have been in the back of his mind, that he was told that, look, if you join the military, it'll be so much easier for you to have access to these things. But if you don't join, it's kind of like helter skelter. You don't know. They can take him to a different place, and it happened a second time as well. And I describe it in the book, where he was taken to another facility. This one we think was off planet, somewhere else. And again, the same thing. He's in there. He's having these experiences. Is it being exposed to something? Then a more senior person comes in and says, "What are you doing here? You're not military. Get out." And so, even though you might have some people within the covert world sympathetic and wanting to expose JP to things, there were other groups saying, no, he's not military, so we're not going to let him have a look at this. We're not going to read him in. So it happened a second time. And so I think that when you combine it with the fact that Donald Trump announced and Congress approved the creation of Space Force, and Space Command was set up in September of 2019, that's what led to JP deciding that it would be better, that he would be more effective if he was actually part of the military. So that's, and it wasn't long after the creation of Space Command that JP enlisted.
And the interesting part, I'm just thinking of Jackie Gleason. I'm sure you know the story, the alleged story, that President Nixon drove the car outside of the base, I believe it was the Air Force Base in Homestead, Florida, without any security detail, and went to pick him up and brought him and showed him some EBEs there. But again, Jackie Gleason was a famous person, knew the president. In this case, JP was a civilian, an average person. And the question is, why him? Could it be because he carried something in his DNA that could be used to further the technological exploration in these places?
Yes, that's exactly the reason. I think at some point, the covert military people recognized that JP had a certain set of genes or a type of consciousness, or a combination of the two, that gave him access to these kinds of technologies that were off-world or ancient, that these technologies often had some kind of protective mechanism. And if you didn't have the right DNA and consciousness, you could be hurt very badly. And there was a story by Tucker Carlson covered a story. Well, actually talked about an incident that happened. He said, and this only happened about 2 months ago. And Tucker Carlson said that about 11 years ago, he was approached by a highly credentialed a medical doctor. I think he said Stanford medical facility there in California, and he said that this doctor had told Tucker that there had been over 100 military personnel who had been severely injured, suffered brain damage, or killed outright when they interacted with these extraterrestrial technologies. So Tucker said this so a couple of months ago, and he said that was 11 years ago. So that was 2000. So in 2012, this Stanford brain specialist is trying to treat Air Force pilots or personnel who have gotten too close to the UFOs and have suffered traumatic brain injury, over 100 of them. So that's a lot of personnel. So you can imagine if you're losing that many people, and the same thing happened with Bob Lazar. I mean, if you remember Bob Lazar, that was the same thing. I mean, the laboratory scientists studying the propulsion system of that craft that he was working on, they were killed. So it was known that when you are interacting with these kinds of advanced technologies, there's a very high risk of injury, serious injury. And so at some point, someone within the Air Force realized that, well, why don't we get contactees to interact with these things for us? Because they already have experiences interacting with the extraterrestrial craft. And because they're connected with extraterrestrials, maybe they have the right DNA and the right consciousness to be able to safely interact with these advanced technologies that our people are being severely injured when they get too close to. So I don't think it's an accident that JP was encouraged to join the military soon after he began having his experiences in 2008.
Obviously, he was abducted a few times. Is it safe to say, Michael, that he was MyLabbed also?
Oh, yeah, definitely. Many times. Many of his experiences he described in a very, trying to recollect exactly what happened, but he remembered some details, and he remembered often that it would be a kind of a triangle-shaped craft, and he would remember a pilot, typically an Air Force pilot, and they were typically silent. They wouldn't share much information. They would just take him to different places. But yeah, he was taken involuntarily. I won't say he resisted. He seemed to be compliant. I think he just accepted that, these are strange things that happened to him. So he never told me, anything like when some people get abducted, they resist and fight and yell and scream and all of that stuff. He never said that happened to him. He said he'd be taken on these craft, and he said he felt that his job was to just learn and observe. And that's what he did. He just kind of would learn and observe and try and remember as much as he could when he would talk to me. And, I'd just take notes and sometimes tape him. And that's how I was able to eventually put all that together to come up with a very coherent narrative about his background and what exactly happened to him. And one of the things that became clear in writing the book was that there were agreements reached between this Nordic group of extraterrestrials and the Air Force that. And he also described an incident where some Navy personnel were involved. But I remember him telling me, and it's in the book, he describes how he was at a facility, at a place, and he had been taken there by the Nordics, and he was watching how Air Force and Navy personnel were being trained by Nordics to use the extraterrestrial technologies. And JP describes being on a platform with I think it was a Navy officer, just observing it all. So JP was put there by the Nordic, and to watch this. And then JP was told by the Nordic that they reached agreement with the Air Force that they would protect him.
Like a protected asset, you mean?
That they would protect JP.
So he was a protected asset of the Nordics.
Oh, yeah, definitely. That was very clear early on. From one of those early experiences I describe in the book, I think it was around 2016, he was taken to a facility and by the Nordics to watch Air Force and Navy personnel being trained in Nordic extraterrestrial technologies. And he was told by the Nordics, we have reached agreements with the Air Force that they will protect you and you are allowed to observe what is happening. So that was also a pretty big factor in what happened. And, maybe that's why the Air Force people first took him to that Ark facility, or the platform floating over the Ark facility in the Bermuda Triangle, because the Air Force and the Nordics had reached an agreement that the Air Force knew that JP was working with the Nordics, that he's one of them. Let's just say that he's one of them or tied in with them, and that they would protect him, and that was a condition of the kind of agreement and the cooperation that the Nordics and the Air Force had. And
sorry, finish what you're saying.
So I was just going to say that was one of the experiences, and one of the things that kind of like substantiates this was that in 2018, again, this is before JP joined the Army. In 2018, he had moved to Orlando, and he had an experience with one of these Nordics that landed near him, near his home in a kind of more rural area of Orlando. The Nordic landed in a spacecraft and talked to him and offered him a ride and that. And JP declined. He wasn't sure about the wisdom of doing that. Later on, he said that he didn't get on that Nordic spacecraft because he felt he was being watched, and that if he got on, he would get into a lot of trouble. That's what he told me. But the interesting thing was, there's two really interesting things about that particular incident in 2018 that's in the book. It's a chapter in the book. Is that in that incident, he described the Nordic as wearing an Air Force an Air Force uniform. So the Nordic was wearing an Air Force uniform, blonde, blue eyes, but kind of like Air Force regulation haircut. So he didn't have the long flowing hair. It had been cut to kind of like that regulation Air Force crew cut style. And JP took a photograph of the flying saucer as the Nordic left. That his camera didn't work when the Nordic was there, when he was near the craft. But as soon as the Nordic left and the craft started to rise up, his camera started working and he took photos. And so that sequence of photos was something I published, and it's in the book as well. So there you have actually photographic evidence supporting JP's claim that the Nordics are working with the Air Force, that there's a unit of Nordics stationed with the Air Force, helping them, and that JP is tied in with that group of Nordics, and the Air Force are protecting JP.
Let's unpack this for a moment, because when I'm thinking of the alliances, apparently there seems to be two groups. The Greys, the Deep State, the CIA are competing, and they're the ones trying to get rid of the Nordics. Are the Nordics the ones that feel now that they're persecuted and they need help, and they want to help us providing technology, healing, free energy, and all those things, and that's why they want people like JP, like you, to release this information, because this protects them?
Well, the Air Force, one of my books, the U.S. Air Force Secret Space Program, talked about a transition, that there had been a transition, a pretty important shift in the official Air Force policy towards the different extraterrestrial groups. I mean, from the early 1950s or late 1940s, the Air Force began working with the Germans out of Antarctica, and with the Greys and with the reptilians, and they began to develop spacecraft with the cooperation of that group. And on the other hand, the Navy was working with the Nordics. That was the way it unfolded. And, when you look at it from a bigger picture perspective, well, it makes perfect sense. If you have different branches of the military which are completely compartmentalized and separate, and there are different factions of extraterrestrials that are competing with different technologies, and they're trying to get influence over the planet, well, then, why would you just work with one faction? You would want to work with both factions. And because the US is kind of unique amongst all countries, because it does have distinct separate military factions. So the Air Force worked with the Greys, with the reptilians, with the Nazis out of Antarctica, and the Nordics worked primarily with the Navy. And by sometime in that period, around 2017, around that period, the Air Force realized that the technology that they had been given by the Greys and by the reptilians was vastly inferior to the technology that had been given to the Navy. That the Navy had space carrier groups, that they had these very long kilometer-sized spacecraft carriers with space fighters and so forth that could deploy into deep space or even interstellar space, that the Nordics were helping the Navy develop really, top of the line technologies, whereas the Greys and the reptilians were always giving the Air Force this kind of second-rate technologies. So at some point, 2017, I mean, that's what I identify in that book, the Air Force Secret Space Program book. The Air Force senior leadership had a kind of an epiphany that, okay, we got to start working with these Nordics. And so that's around the same time that the Nordics that JP was associated with began working with the Air Force, and that relationship deepened, and the Air Force, and I think, looking at it now, Mel, from this position, I would say that that was probably the reason why JP was allowed to take those photos in 2017 of all these flying triangles near a MacDill Air Force Base, was because of these agreements between the Nordics and the Air Force. And the Air Force wanted to show their goodwill to the Nordics by saying, hey, we're allowing one of your guys, one of your assets, JP, to take these photos of our hardware because we want full disclosure. And so I think that was kind of like a feather in the cap of the Air Force as far as the Nordics were concerned, that, okay, the Air Force are genuinely behind disclosure. They're helping our guy take photos and to release this to the public. And so I think that makes much more sense now why JP is unique, in that he's being helped in taking photos and releasing these photos. And even now, while being part of the Army, being able to share this information with me is because by the Air Force and now today by the Army allowing him to share this information with me, they are showing their kind of good faith to these agreements that were reached between the Air Force and the Nordics, and we need to include the Army in that as well now.
Why do you think that the Nordics don't respond? If they have this technology so much more advanced than what we have, why don't they respond? And they feel persecuted and they need help from us.
Well, I think that's a really good question, Mel. I think it's probably because the negative extraterrestrials, they were working with, I guess the Babylonian money magic controllers. I mean, these beings or these controllers, these elite groups, I mean, they are not something new. They have been in control of the planet for thousands of years. And
you mean the Anunnaki?
That's right. They date themselves back to the Anunnaki. Marduk and Enlil, those were the two of the chief Anunnaki that kind of stayed behind and created havoc on the earth. And I think that as a result of the kind of like very long presence of these kind of Anunnaki leaders. Marduk was one. I think also the son of Enlil, Ninurta, was another one. Two very powerful Anunnaki that were like at the tip of the spear, or the tip of the pyramid, if you like, and they were essentially like the Pindar of the planet. Now, I guess the Pindar is typically described as a human that is the kind of like the top of the food chain when it comes to the occult hierarchy. So they would work with these Anunnaki like Ninurta or like Marduk. But then you have the Greys, you have the Draco reptilians here. So they were the dominant elite. For thousands of years, they've been the dominant elite. Now, things have been changing over the last, I guess, century, if you like. The Nordics have been intervening more because the mass consciousness is rising. And I think the more the mass consciousness rises, I think the more influential the Nordics become. And conversely, the less powerful that kind of Babylonian money, magic, and Draco Orion Grey complex becomes. And so I think that's why the White Hats are now in a much more powerful position and are working with the Nordics and the positive extraterrestrial factions.
Now, JP joins the military. Let's begin with some of the covert missions that he was involved in.
Sure. Well, probably the one that really stood out to begin with is where he was told by his Air Force operatives that there would be a incoming fleet of spacecraft, very large spacecraft arriving in our solar system, and that Space Command was in charge of a flotilla of ships from the Earth that would meet and greet these incoming visitors. And so he was part of that mission. He remembers going out there, and he remembers what it was like being near Jupiter, and the experiences that he had while he was part of that expedition out there to greet the visitors, and the kind of interactions that happened with some of the visitors. So, that's very significant because it dovetails with the work of others saying that there were fleets of extraterrestrial spacecraft coming in. You have Oumuamua, of course, that stood for Advanced Scoutcraft. I think that was, I can't remember the exact year, whether it was 2017, 2019, something like that, that kind of preceded this incoming fleet. And what JP was told also dovetailed what some other contactees like Elena Denan and a few others were saying about incoming fleets. Alex Collier, another contactee, was saying they were getting similar information from their extraterrestrial contacts that a very new, powerful group of extraterrestrials that were actually from another galaxy, that they were part of a kind of intergalactic alliance, were arriving in our solar system to kind of oversee the transition of our solar system from being kind of insular outpost controlled by these draconian Orion Grey groups that kept us suppressed into something that would interact more and become part of the galactic community, that they had come to watch that. So JP's mission kind of like corroborated that was one of the things that he experienced directly.
When it comes to these missions, he was taken at one point to, and the thing is, when he gets into these craft, it doesn't take hours or days. Sometimes it takes minutes. He talks about this location where he saw different types of animals, flora, and fauna. Can you expound on that?
Right. Well, he's been taken on many missions, both as a civilian and as a military serviceman, where he's gone into these domes or space arks where he's seen very strange fauna and animals. And these are clearly arks. These are designed in a way to preserve certain genetic strains of animals or plant life. And the JP was told that one day in the future that these arks would be very important for reseeding humanity, or reseeding the planet. That it was important for those arks to just get a very good sample of the different strains of animals or plants that they wanted to preserve for a future. So he has been on many missions like that. While he was with the military, after he joined the military in 2019, he's been on a number of missions to space arks where he has seen not so much animals, but he's seen very unusual plants, very unusual fish life, and very unusual hieroglyphs, ancient writings on walls of these space arks.
I want to really discuss the space arks because it seems to me that when we think of Noah's Ark, we think of the wooden ark that Noah allegedly built to put all the animals and recreate life here on Earth after the flood. I wonder, because there's so much technology that we see in the past. We're supposedly at the top of the food chain. We're the most advanced we've ever been. But all you have to do is look at certain buildings around the world, look at the pyramids and megalithic structures. It makes you wonder if we had a civilization here before that had technology that we can even imagine today. And what if a cataclysm or perhaps these draconians you refer to created a reset? And these arks that are placed around the world, in Central Asia, in Russia, in the Atlantic Ocean, and many other places, and even on the moon, that they have been used in the past. And perhaps they are restarting right now. I want to discuss this with you when we come back, because there's a possibility that this might be happening as we speak. How can people buy the new book and all your other books, Michael?
People can just visit my website, exopolitics.org, for the whole collection of books, webinars that I offer, articles, interviews, and so forth. And you can get this book at Amazon.com. Just go and U.S. Army Insider Missions.
And when we come back, I want to discuss also, I think it was the last story you discussed when the Nordic came to Orlando, and after they left, if I remember correctly, he saw a wall in his house was wet. And that happens when a portal opens, almost as if somebody was watching him. But we'll discuss that when we come back. This is Mel Hostelrick. I'm here with my special guest, Dr. Michael Salla, and his new book, Incredible Story. Much more when we return. Don't go anywhere.
Thank you for listening to the first part of this important Veritas interview. To listen to the rest and all of our exclusive material, proceed to the Veritas Plus member section or join the Veritas Plus family by subscribing. Click on the subscribe button at veritasradio.com. Don't forget to visit the Veritas store for focused life force energy. Get a 15-day free trial of FLFE today with no credit card required. And if you want to get in touch with Mel, want to be a guest on this radio program, have a guest suggestion, or have feedback, just click on the contact button on our website at veritasradio.com. Now, proceed to the Veritas Plus member section or subscribe to listen to the rest of the interview. You don't want to miss it. Thank you for listening to Veritas. Because you don't want to believe, you want to know.